life on our planet, but I'm always curious about everyone's journey, how they started their journey in whatever field in the filmmaking it is, and yourself being in visual effects. Just run that by how it all began, what inspired you, and your paths that you have taken to be where you are.
It's a pretty unusual one, really, because as you can see now, I've turned my video on. I'm not a spring chicken, so I actually, I actually started as an engineer. I mean, I've got a degree in mechanical engineering,
Mm-hmm.
uh, which obviously is a pretty technical subject, albeit a very creative one, of course, because engineers are responsible for most of the made objects around us that we
Yep.
use day to day, even though we forget that. And I was very much obsessed with the motor car growing up, and still am
Mm-hmm.
actually. Uh, and so I pursued that career, and I went to work in Detroit in the early 1990s,
Right.
um, designing bits of car
Mm-hmm.
initially.
Right.
And that it turned out that the software that we were using, which was very, very expensive, as were the machines at the time,
Mm-hmm.
to do pre-production work on cars and pre-visualize vehicle shapes and engineering problems,
Right.
got co-opted into filmmaking. So there was a weird junction at which we were essentially using the same technology, very, very similar, more similar than it is now. I mean, they still coexist now, but in those days it was less specific for the two disciplines. And I'd worked in Detroit for 4 years, I think, and I wanted to move back to the UK. And there was a small users group of people,
Right.
and I happened to know the guy in the UK, and he was ironically called Gareth Edwards, not the Gareth Edwards, though. There's different Gareth
Okay.
Edwards. Um, although the other Gareth Edwards worked in the UK in the early 90s doing the same thing as well. But anyway, I phoned this guy up, and the other Gareth Edwards, and he says, do you know how to operate the software? I was like, yeah, absolutely. I said, are there any jobs going in the UK? And he said, well, it's funny you should say that, but Kodak have just hired me to start a visual effects facility called CineSite. Can you send me some of the work that you've done to look over? Anyway, so I sent him some of the things that I'd done sort of previous engineering wise.
Mm-hmm.
And he phoned me back the next day and said, I've got you a plane ticket, come on the plane for an interview. And that was how I entered the film business, because it
Wow.
wasn't even, visual effects wasn't a thing. There was, maybe one course in the UK possibly that touched on it at university. So it wasn't an aspiration you could have in 1994. So it happened slightly at random, as you said. And that was it. So I was, one of the first few employees of CineSite in the UK. I mean, they had a facility here in the States, in Los Angeles. And that was it. That was how my career started. So on a random phone call, would you believe it? I often say to
I,
people, I wouldn't give myself a job today.
it's true in every time I speak to people, whether it's for the podcast, even my journey, everybody has just kind of popped into this thing out of nowhere unexpectedly, or even, some cases knowingly, but even when you know it, you go through the most unexpected paths and that you don't realize are going to take you there. So I have always find that very exciting and fascinating more than anything else, because we all have journeys, we all have paths that we take, which may not seem the right ones at the time, but in hindsight, they always are.
Yeah, it turned out, I mean, obviously it turned out to be an excellent decision. And, it's been an amazing career, really. It, it beats working most of the time.
Yeah. No, that's great. And what projects have you worked on that I would probably know of, or the audience watching and listening would know of in terms of your career over the years?
Well, certainly at the beginning, a lot of things that have now, gone down into law. So one of my favorites from the beginning was Space Jam, the first
Oh, I love
Space
that
Jam.
movie.
Yeah, but it was such a great movie, and it was hard to make at the time. I mean, It was 96, I think, when we did that,
Yep,
and that was an
I remember
enormous
that.
undertaking because almost every shot in the film is visual effects. And I did the whole practiced CG,
Oh
um,
wow.
just built and rendered it, um, which it was a fairly big sequence in the film, and hard work. But yeah, it looked great. It was great to work on. But privileged to work on that movie. It was really good fun. I worked on the very
Nice.
first Mission Impossible, some compositing on that.
Mm.
Armageddon, a few shots on that. We came in at the end,
Some
did some bits and pieces. So big stuff in the early days. And more recently, I supervised the first season of Outlander, which is a surprisingly big hit, certainly with a certain group of people. Altered Carbon, Agent Carter, lots of telly stuff, Alan Partridge film. The list goes on. I think there's over 100 projects, but latterly more based on streaming and episodic work rather than feature films.
yeah.
Just because they're on the honest truth is actually they're normally slightly more fun to work on in visual effects.
Right. No, those are some great titles. And, it's funny you mentioned Space Jam. My kids saw it, I would guess, probably 5 years ago. And then we saw it again couple of years ago. And then the new one came out. Um, which it was like I just walked out after 10 minutes because it didn't have that heart that the original one did. I'm not even talking about visual effects. I'm just talking in terms of, the original one didn't really have a riveting story or anything, but there was just something there that connected. I think it was maybe a combination of visual effects with the live action. Michael Jordan, of course. It's a very cool film, and in those times, the only two films I think that came with that kind of uh, a live action versus animation mix was Who Framed Roger Rabbit, which was 6, 7 years before, and there was the one with I forget the name, Cool World with Kim Basinger. I don't know if you remember that film. So it
Yeah,
was
I
it
don't know.
was yeah, so it was a great film. I mean, just the moment you mentioned it, I had a smile on my face because it's something I remember seeing in theaters. It's something I didn't even care for basketball. I didn't even care for Michael Jordan, but I truly enjoyed it because I was a huge Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and all those characters fan. So
It
yeah,
has a real charm, I think, even though, as you say, there was the plot's pretty
yeah,
loose, but
yeah.
actually the film is still charming. And you mentioned Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and Ed Jones, who was in charge of Sydney site at the time, also was one of the key people in. I think he won an Oscar for Who Framed Roger Rabbit, actually.
I think so too. Yeah,
But he was certainly led both of those projects. Um, yeah,
yeah.
a
That's
nice
awesome.
legacy film to have worked.
Yeah, no, for sure. And
Yeah,
I think at the time, I don't know if Emblem Nation was involved because Spielberg executive produced it. Disney was involved. And I know Emblem Nation before DreamWorks was formed was based out of UK until after everybody moved over to DreamWorks when DreamWorks was opened. But yeah, some great stuff in the 90s and the 80s. And I always wonder about the stuff even if it was not that great, from a storytelling standpoint, and we all still remember, like when I say we all, I mean like people in our age group, is it because it reminds us of our childhood, or is it because, it was really that great? So it's an interesting psychological thing that, I always wonder about that. Why do we like things, similar things that came out back then and similar things that are coming out now, at least for me? I don't resonate with it in any way. Story, no story, visual effects, no visual effects. But anyways, that's just a thought process.
yeah. Maybe there's a little bit of rose tinted glasses there. It was quite funny because the first film that I did at CineSite was called Lawnmower Man 2, which was epically bad in every way. Um, and we've been on this long filming trip, and there are quite a few people who that film was made around about when they were born who were on on the trip, and
Yeah.
they were like, "It can't be that epically bad." I was like, "No, no, it really is." Anyway, we rewatched it this week, um, and I thought it was as epically bad as I remembered. They thought it was they thought it was extremely funny because it was so bad. Um, but
Yeah.
yeah, luckily that one has been buried in the mists of time. But if any listeners want to dig out Lawnmower Man 2, and you can get to the finish of it, you should be proud of yourself. It's quite hard to get through.
I'm probably gonna make an effort to watch it on the plane. We'll see how long that lasts.
It's so bad. Don't waste those hour and a half of your life.
uh, and moving on to um, your current projects, of course, Life in Our Planet. How had you done, and I had you done any kind of nature-based series beforehand? I'm assuming you had done something similar, but there isn't really anything similar in that nature except the Apple series, to my knowledge.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's not really been a subject. Obviously, I've done creature animation before, but not
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
context of working with wildlife filmmakers. I mean, that's what was the real hook for me. And the extraordinary thing about the project is we made it exactly like a wildlife documentary. Even the filming, there is 6 people on the crew. I mean, there's normally 6 people in catering and the things that I work on. I mean,
yeah,
so there's the, going from that to being in the field where there's the director, the DOP, myself, an assistant producer, and a couple of other people to help out, is quite incredible and quite thrilling. It's because it's quite freeing because you can be much
yeah,
more mobile. You can shoot faster, but it's a whole different genre of cinematography. I mean, Jamie McPherson, he shot most of it, and is Sophie's partner, who you also had on your podcast. Um,
yeah,
he and I had to have formed a really good working relationship and how to film it because he there's no discipline in wildlife photography for a start. I mean, as you can
yeah,
imagine, what happens is they go out to some extraordinary place to film something. They hit go on the camera and hopefully they capture whatever amazing thing is taking place. And then they sort out their story afterwards, editorially often. Whereas the
yeah,
process of visual effects, I want slates and shot numbers and balls and charts and all this technical information. So it was quite a
right.
learning process for them. You can't just turn up and hit go with visual effects.
Yeah, that's something that Sophie mentioned when I was talking to her, that how Jonathan told us that just make sure you get what you want to get the way you want to get it, because there's no like going back. It's just not like, but with other films you can, like, big budget films that you've worked on, you have the budget, like, okay, let's just redo this, or there's some buffer zone in terms of budgeting. But with something like this, 6 people crew, and the budget is always tight, and I know how that is. It's tough. But that's the thing with limited crew. There's that freedom, but the budgets are always tighter.
Yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword, and obviously, um, for the amount of creatures that we had to build and put in the show, the budget was extremely tight. So Sophie's right. I probably annoyed them terribly by going, no, no, you can't do that. No, you can't do that shot. You can't do this. So we did have more restrictions than normal. But they were brilliant. I mean, the whole team, working with Silverback, who are obviously, arguably the world's best nature documentary makers, teaming up with ILM and Amblin was a great mix of people to have on board. But the budget was tight. And so, yeah, shortcuts had to be
Yeah,
taken and decisions made very early. We couldn't waste any money. That's the thing. That's what I had drilled into them, is like, we cannot waste money. We can't do shots that don't make it on screen. We just don't have that luxury. It's all got to be up there. Every time we turn over that camera, we've got to think, yeah, this shot is going to get in the cut.
yeah. What I find fascinating, because it's a new genre, and I think it's only gonna get bigger. Something, again, I was talking to Sophie yesterday, whether we like it or not, who knows, in 5, 10 years, all the nature documentaries might be like that with the AI and everything. I hope not, but the way things are going, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if things go in that direction at least. But what I really found interesting, and obviously it's, you see visual effects in films like Jurassic Park, uh, Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Space Jam, and all the movies that you worked on, and it's a little bit different than compared to, well, I would say it's a lot different compared to like nature docs, because one thing I noticed is, there would be shots where the camera would dolly sideways, and it will go behind a tree, and then it will get a revealing shot, so on and so forth. And just to plan that out, from the production standpoint, and obviously then in post when you guys are working on it, and the timing of it and the messaging that comes out of that timing is exactly the way you intended it. Was there any time difficulties in some of the shots where the timing was a bit off to send the message that was intended to send from the story? And if so, where was that in any of the series, in any of the episodes?
Yeah, I mean, it happened not frequently, but definitely there were shots we did because obviously we're having to frame and move the camera with an imaginary star, if you like.
Mm-hmm.
And so, even though we knew the sizes of all the creatures and we knew roughly how fast they moved, and we would sometimes, if they were human scale, reenact it ourselves. There's quite a lot of me crawling along the ground, being a Lystrasaur or something else. You can get that timing wrong, and we did occasionally. What we would normally do in that situation is it's generally to do with whether was the shot long enough or framed wide enough, and there are probably 20 shots in the film where we've had to doctor the whole environment, so we've basically remade the top third of frame out of something else or other shots that we did. So there
Oh,
are a
okay.
few shots in where we physically basically widened the camera or moved it faster or slowed it down so that we could fit the intended animation into the space that was available, with the creature being at the right scale. I finished it so long ago, I can't give you that many
That's okay.
instances. But
I was just,
I think there's a couple of T-Rex shots where we had to do that because it's such a big animal. It's 14 meters long. It's hard to visualize a 14-meter long creature. It's big. I can tell you that
yeah,
much. Um,
yeah,
so
right.
yeah, so there were shots like that, and also what we did. You were talking about tracking through and revealing with creatures behind a foreground element, which is very much a part of the nature of filming wildlife, is that often they don't
Mm-hmm.
get a clear shot of the creature, so it becomes part of the visual language of the people who are used to watching when they see wildlife, is that you don't get a clear headshot because the cameraman's in the Serengeti and there just happens to be stuff in the way. And so we would create that foreground stuff, of course, because that's all blue screened elements, to be able to put them in front of the creatures. So some of that stuff is artifice as well, where we've deliberately shot blue screen elements with Jamie.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but to give us that feeling where we get those reveals, and a bit like we have that window into the creature's world, rather than just a clear cut thing that you'd have in a drama where you'd not obscure somebody's fate for obvious reasons.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's something I've always enjoyed about the nature documentaries, and you know, it's just that level of intimacy. And obviously, you know, when you're watching it, it seems like it was a piece of cake, but obviously, I remember watching behind the scenes of, I think it was Planet Earth, the first one, the series. And at that time I realized, I'm like, I think that was like 13 years ago, if I'm not mistaken. There was a sequence of plants growing. I don't remember the details, but it was basically a 360-degree where the camera would go from the branch of the limb of the tree, come down, go around, and go through other branches and come back up. And that entire shot that lasted, I would like to guess, 10 to 20 seconds was a year-long project. And it was, it's amazing the amount of patience and people on field, especially for nature docs, have, because it's not that easy, to be able to pull that off. And then if something goes wrong, the shot's gone. Just like, you can't tell the giraffe or zebra to redo it or move back, and you just have
No,
to wait it
exactly.
out
I mean,
again.
that's the thing. They are very patient people, and yeah, sometimes they'll go out into the field and not come back. They're obviously, without giving a spoiler away, there's a sequence in this, a wildlife sequence, not a visual effects one, where there's a certain creature in it, and there's a key moment, and actually they don't get the key moment. They get the before and after the key moment, but it's just that particular moment of what
Yeah.
happened wasn't caught on camera. And that can happen. And if you've spent
Oh yeah.
6 months trying to get it, so that's it. That's what you have to live with, the fact that it didn't quite work out in the way you wanted. So they enjoyed working with me because at least I could get it to work out the way they wanted pretty much all the time.
Yeah. No, capturing the moment, it's so key, and it's in any kind of doc form. I remember about 10 years ago, when I made my first documentary, 10 years ago or 13 years ago. Um, I remember, like, you're rolling and you're like, okay, this is getting a little repetitive. And you stop rolling, and then something happens right there. Like, literally, you stop rolling. What you are waiting for happens naturally. You're like, shit. So, the lesson is, you just keep rolling. You just don't know what that second that you may need, it may pop up. And that's just the way the Murphy's Law works. There's always something that you'll end up missing, and you have to work around it.
Yeah, so obviously when they work, they use pre-roll on the camera, which for the viewers who don't know, basically means it's sort of recording all the time, a bit like a
Yeah.
dash cam.
Yeah.
So you always know that you can get what you need. So
Yeah.
um, I think a lot of great wildlife documentaries have been caught because of pre-roll, because of pre-roll with stuff happening.
Yeah.
Um, so
100%. 100%. And when you got the footage, was it coming in chunks, or was it like when each episode was over, that's when you were starting it, or was it just all over the place?
um, we filmed it. We didn't film it in order, in any real order. So it came in as sequences, basically at random,
Mm-hmm.
depending on how we filmed them. So the very first thing we filmed in Chile, in the Atacama, before lockdown. Um,
Mm.
and so that was by nature of the fact it was the first thing we did, came in. So it came in sequences. So when you see the
I kind of lost you there. There you go. I kind of lost you there. Now you're back.
oh,
Can you hear me?
sorry. Yeah, I can. Sorry, I've just had a thing from my flight to London has been cancelled. Whoa. Uh,
Oh,
okay. Uh, shit.
weather?
Uh,
There's no
I don't
weather
know
in
what
San
it
Francisco.
was.
Please take your time. Don't worry about me. Take your time.
Okay. I'm back in the room. Someone else. It's not my issue generally to to sort out flights, but obviously I've been here for 7 weeks. I'm quite keen to go home, but apparently I'm not going to be. Um, let's
Sorry
see what
about that.
happens. That's all right. Um, yeah. So sequences, yeah, they got turned over in a fairly arbitrary order depending on when we filmed them, really.
Mm.
But nice. So that the nice thing about the show is that it does stick with that wildlife format, in that we tell discrete little 6 or 7 minute stories about the creatures and how they fit into the overarching story of life on Earth, which is what made the story really great. I think is that there is that continuous line, even though bits of it fall off from the start to where we are now, which is why it works so well, I think, because you can get involved in an actual story, whereas although Prehistoric Planet is a great documentary, doesn't have the same story arc continuing through the whole thing that we're lucky enough to have with telling the story of all of life on Earth.
Yeah, and I won't lie when I say this. When I first saw the trailer, like I remember the opening images when the T-Rex attacks the Triceratops. My first reaction was, did we just not see this on Apple? Like literally that was just my first reaction. And then when I saw the trailer, I'm like, okay, this is interesting. But when I started the series, it was just completely different, and nothing like Prehistoric Planet. Again, the only similarity is there's just some dinosaurs and that's it. Like there's nothing else comparable at all. And I found this way more interesting. I didn't finish Prehistoric Planet completely. I think I probably finished most of the season for first season with my kids. And now my kids are watching this one. They're on episode 5, I think, and they're really enjoying it.
Right. Yeah, I think that the great thing about Life on Our Planet is the story sort of gets more involving as you go along, a bit like when you watch a drama. So I think you watch the first episode, you're a bit like, well, and then you get the hook in. So I hope listeners who are doing it, I would say, if you get through it, go through episodes 1 and 2. And episode 1 is a bit of a sort of everything to try and get started from a position. But once you get past that, I think you get into the meat of the story. It was really great. It goes along. And we deliberately, part of Amblin's input was to try and design cliffhangers at the end of the series to go, oh, this is, as you would do in a drama, to go, I've got to watch next week's now to find out what happens with this.
Yeah.
And at the end of this particular episode. So, and hopefully that's moderately successful.
And no, and that worked because maybe that's the reason. I mean, I can't remember it now. That's the reason I probably kept watching it on the plane because, normally on a flight, like when you're, 5-6 hour flight, you get tired and you want to do different things. You want to listen to music, you want to take a nap, a bunch of different things. But it was just like a continuous thing, like, 4.5, maybe 5 episodes if my memory serves me right. Yeah, and it was just, so well done. And one thing I noticed, so I was always looking for, and just because the filmmaker in me, which footage is real. I mean, some of it was obvious, right? Like the dinosaurs or prehistoric creatures or prehistoric insects and bugs. But most of the stuff I couldn't differentiate between, the way the movements were of any prehistoric creature versus the current creatures, like, whether it's a giraffe or zebra. Yeah, there you could tell maybe if you looked really, really closely. But I think the challenge that I found, at least where it became very obvious for me, was a very first episode. I think it was, I don't remember it was under the water, the very first um uh giant fish that you guys show.
Oh
That's
yeah,
kind
that's
of, yeah, I thought that was because I know doing effects in waters is not that easy. It's like a very challenging thing. Like, was that something that you were satisfied with as just an individual, like the way it came out? How challenging was that to pull that off?
really challenging actually. The Dunkleosteus is the name of the creature, a big bony headed
Okay.
fish. And yeah, really, that was a quite hard creature to animate because it is quite prehistoric. Um, and it's much bonier than quite a lot of modern fish that we're used to. So the big front section of it is armored, and so that bit doesn't move very much because it's completely rigid. And it's also a giant creature. I think estimates vary, but we made one that was about 8 meters long in the end. And you would think animating a fish would be really straightforward, but there's something about the motion that's very hard to capture, especially at scale.
Yeah.
So we both needed to move quite quickly to keep the pace up, but also to be realistic. And I think maybe if you picked up, maybe it's a little bit fast. I watched it again the other day.
Yeah.
and thought, yeah, could have been a bit fast for the scale. Maybe that's what's wrong with it. I mean, we spent a lot of time doing that sequence because it's also one of the few sequences where everything is visual effects, so we didn't shoot any live
Yeah,
action photography
right. I was
for
gonna
the
say
deep
that. I think,
ocean. Because,
yeah,
yeah, because we can't track the camera. So we if you imagine when we make these virtual creatures, we have to put them into the scene, and their feet have to stick to the ground, and they have to be moving correctly in the environment, and we have to create a virtual camera to do that. But you can't do it in the open ocean because nothing stays still, so you have no reference point to work with.
yeah,
Everything's just around. So that was one of the ones where we actually had to make everything. But yeah, super
yeah,
challenging to do that big creature, and it's not something that people are used to seeing either. It's quite an odd looking thing. So
Hmm.
definitely one of the more challenging bits.
Is it fair to say that was something that took the longest, or at least one of the scenes that took the longest?
It would be the fairest to say it was one of the scenes that went the most over budget.
Okay,
So,
fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah, yeah.
That's
So,
long then. Yeah,
yeah, in relative terms, it took longer than it should have done. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
And I wonder, like because there have been so many nature documentaries, especially in the last 10 years, 15 years, that human eye has kind of become accustomed to what's underneath the water, right? Had that not been the case, I believe that people would probably assume that's how it is underwater. Like that's how you film it. I think because people have become so immune to it, so accustomed to it, it's not that it's people can pick up things now very, very quickly, especially even underwater.
yeah. I mean, I think that's true of all the things that we did. Is that your familiarity with observing things, you almost don't realize, but subconsciously you understand quite a lot about the world. So for instance, making the Smilodon cat is harder than making some of the other prehistoric creatures because you know how that thing should move and what it should do and the expressions it should make and how its ears move and all those things because you're familiar with watching domestic cats or indeed wildlife documentaries of lions and tigers, which are pretty similar. Um,
Yeah.
so the closer the thing is to like the human experience, the much more difficult they are to realize effectively. So a T-Rex is essentially fairly easy. I mean, we have no experience of huge bipedal um, reptile things wandering around. Well, they're dinosaurs, not reptiles, but yeah, so they are a little bit more forgiving than something like a fish, which everyone knows what a fish does. You've seen lots of them.
Yeah. Right. Um, how big was your team in the visual effects department?
Pretty varied, really. I mean, I can't remember the exact number of people that touched the show, but it would be between 100 and 200, and probably at its peak, we had sort of 70 or 80 people working on the show.
Incredible.
At the end. But it was a very long period of time. It turned out to be, the production from when we filmed in Chile to the end, it was at least 3 years. And I'd been talking about the show for a good 18 months, 2 years before we actually put pen to paper. So yeah, extraordinarily long time for a
Yeah.
project
Well,
that we were.
well, COVID had a lot to do with it, right? So, I mean, that pushed
Yeah,
things.
it did happen, slap back and bang in the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
And so most of the work was actually done remotely, which is also pretty challenging for a visual effects supervisor. I mean, I like to get all the people in a room and point at stuff in person and talk through the creative issues. So yeah, it's very, very much harder to do that remotely. A lot more time consuming because you have to speak to people individually, really. Um, it's much harder to do it en masse. So that was, yeah, one of the more challenging bits that, if I could turn back the clock, obviously I don't think anyone would want COVID, but it definitely made the project more difficult. I remember handing out keyboards and computer monitors at ILM on the day that London was shut down, basically, to send people home. So we had to send 500 people home from the office in one day.
Hmm.
and then get them all working from home, which is not
Yeah.
an arbitrary task.
Yeah, no, that was that was it's almost a blur to me now, all that time period, and I would like to keep it that way. I don't want to go through that again. But what was the show came out last week? Yes.
Yes.
And I should say the series came out last week. Uh what was the deadline in terms of from your team to have everything done by so that it gets, picture locked basically?
Well, actually, it was really interesting. We obviously are not in control of when Netflix schedule things, but we finished the show a year ago.
Oh wow.
Um, yeah, yeah. So it's finished way. Our stuff was finished way before it was needed. I mean, and we didn't know what the scheduling was going to be, so but that was our deadline. Yeah, so we finished sort of October and troubled on a bit into November, but over a year ago. Um, yeah, so yeah, I've been
Interesting.
working on the currently here filming for at least since the beginning of this year, anyway, or just a few months into this year. So yeah, it's quite weird. I was back on the road in filming in April this year. So yeah, a long time between us finishing and it being on air.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder that why that was. I mean, I'm sure it was like marketing reasons or, the audience and
Yeah,
maybe the
yeah. Who knows
Christmas,
the machination?
Thanksgiving approaching in the US and Christmas approaching. But yeah, no, that's interesting. And for me, one thing I truly enjoyed among everything else was, we're moving on from visual effects a little bit, is, obviously Morgan Freeman's narration, that really did it, but also the script was really well done. But the sheer amount of footage there was, I mean, if you start counting the number of shots, I mean, it's crazy. I do that anyways, but for this particular film, it's a little bit different because you have to add these visual effects. It's not like, you have a zebra running in or a lion catching a deer throughout in and out. But just to kind of go through all that and finding the right moments and adding those visual effects, it just must be a daunting task. I mean, you probably learned a lot from this.
Yeah, I mean, I think a shot count wise, it's certainly one of the biggest shows I've ever done because obviously it's structured. I mean, Outlander was probably similar because that was 16 episodes, but um, yeah, this is it's eight. They're not hour longs, but they're 45, 50 minutes. So it ended up being 900 shots, which is that's a lot of shots. It's like making an animated
Yeah.
feature almost by the time you're done in terms of the shot count. I luckily, because it was spread over a long time and it came in piecemeal, it never felt so daunting because it always comes in a discrete chunk where you're doing one. So you've got the Terror Bird versus Smilodon scene, and that's 40 shots. So you just go, okay, that's 40 shot chunk. We'll do this chunk. We'll get that done,
Yeah.
and then we're doing Fisher. So I mean, it's a big challenge. It's a we every time we version something, it gets reviewed. It gets a little internal number, and we reviewed over 60,000 versions
Wow.
of shots. Yeah, which
That that's
is it's a
it's
lot of
crazy
hours of
numbers.
looking at.
Well, it's not even
Yeah,
just the hours and the crazy amount of footage and time, but it's just you get, it's just like editing a feature. You get sick and tired of looking at the same thing over and over again, and your creativity kind of fades out on that particular thing. Like how much can I do or what should I do? But again, that's why creative people are creative people, right? So
yeah. I mean, I by the end of it, I definitely had what I call decision fatigue, um,
that's a
where
great word for it. Yeah.
yeah, you're making so many decisions that in my everyday life, my poor wife had had to put up with me going, look, I can't make a decision about anything. Don't ask me whether I want, you know, my toast buttered or not. I can't make another decision. I'm out of decisions. Just bring I'll eat
I don't.
it or whatever. But yeah, it takes a little while to recover. It takes a few weeks to get over decision fatigue. But
Yeah, I don't blame you. I don't blame you at all. And it can be daunting, but at the same time, when the results do come out and people start watching it, then that thing goes out the way. I'm glad I did what I did, and that feeling of people praising your work, or even just watching it, not necessarily praising it. It means a lot to an artist.
yeah. I mean, just the process of creating a product that people are hopefully able to enjoy
Yeah,
is brilliant. I mean, it's a luxury that I don't take for granted. I'm very privileged to be able to do that. It was pretty terrifying, really, for the show because the budget was very tight for the ambition, and the weight of it being ILM at the same time. So, I say to people that the expectations I worked out just to scare myself that I think we have about something like 1/15 of the money per screen minute that Jurassic Park has. Um, so you have to make something that's roughly approximate on about 7.5% of the money that you would have had you made
yeah,
Jurassic Park, um, which is a pretty daunting task, and hopefully it stands up for the most part to that. I mean, obviously, it's not as complicated as Jurassic Park, but it's different. It has different challenges. There's a lot of long, lingering shots which you get in wildlife, which obviously you don't normally do in drama. It's quite cutty,
yeah.
so there's nowhere to hide when you stick the camera in the face of a Smilodon for a 45-second shot. It's fairly disturbing for a visual effects supervisor. But yeah, fingers crossed we get away with it most of the time.
Yeah. Speaking of Jurassic Park, did you see any of the films? Kind of just to get some, not that you need inspiration, but at the same time, like I always watch The Godfather before I start anything, just to kind of be in that mindset.
Yeah, I mean, I watched quite a few wildlife documentaries, interestingly,
Okay.
to
Which
get
ones?
my. Well, obviously, Life on Our Planet, which had been made by Silverback as well, which is a
Yeah.
fantastic series, by the way, still on Netflix.
Yeah, Sophie was telling me about it. I gotta watch it.
Yeah, it's really, really good. And Blue Planet, some of the things that they've made when they were at the NHU, the BBC, obviously all those blue
Mm.
chip things. Um, and Jurassic, I have obviously seen multiple times, but I actually had to put a glass wall up. So David Vickery, my colleague, was making the most recent Jurassic World film at the same time
Oh wow.
as were doing this, and we both knew that we had some overlapping creatures that do actually appear in both films, um, and so we had to not deliberately not look at each other's work really because I was told in no uncertain terms that if it looked like anything from Jurassic, I'd be in big trouble. So um, I didn't want to give myself that visual stimulation of seeing anything that Dave was doing at the same time as a making leap, which was quite hard. So we'd go and have the occasional beer and complain about making dinosaurs, but try not to look at what each other were doing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that makes sense. And now that I think about it, we're talking about Jurassic Park and we're talking about why did they delay it that long for them to release it. It makes sense now because as of September, there has been a massive promotion going on in UK and US and Canada for Jurassic Park, the original one, 30th anniversary. So I think they wanted to tie that in, that same audience that excited about dinosaurs in Jurassic Park, kind of part of that audience. My guess is that because it doesn't make any other sense to me for them to delay it that long. But yeah, Jurassic Park. I mean, it's one of the most amazing films ever made. And I'm happy to tell you that there were none of the dinosaurs which I was hoping to would look like similar to the Jurassic Park. It didn't come through. So mission accomplished for you.
Good. Yeah, I didn't get fired.
I sure hope not. I sure hope not. Yeah, listen, Jonathan, this has been fantastic. I'm sorry your flight's been canceled. I,
Yeah,
I,
I'll
I, I,
let you know how that works out.
I hope it works out. And it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I would love to speak to you about anything that you've done recently or in upcoming future, whatever you feel comfortable with. Let me know. I'd love to have you on. I had a great time and would love to chat with you again.
That would be great. Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been delightful speaking to you.
Pleasure's all mine, Jonathan. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. I'll see you again soon. Bye.
Yep, for sure. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for watching and listening. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share, and comment. And do come back for another episode. Until then, have a great day.